Welcome to the Aro Benaiah Show, where we bring you the real stories of hands-on entrepreneur, builders, and innovators creating impacts in their community and beyond. Today, I'm excited to speak with Josh Harrison, co-founder and chief strategies officer of Live Island, an award-winning green infrastructure company in New York that is transforming rooftop streets and coastline into living, breathing ecosystem. For over 3 decades, Josh has worked literally cool city. His work is about providing that nature isn't just
Well, thank you for inviting me.
so just how was it like growing up?
How was it like growing up? Well, I had whether it's the advantage or the disadvantage of moving around a lot. So I had the fortune of living on 3 different continents. And Africa, sadly, not one of them, but I hope to change that at some point soon. And lived in a lot of different places and cultures. And my parents were first environmental artists and later teachers. So it gave me a lot of exposure to what's happening on the planet and how we engage with it. And I realized at an early age that what we do has a real impact on who we are and how we move forward. I've spent most of my life and career looking at different ways to make different kinds of impacts in the communities that I'm in. And for the last 15 or 20 years, as climate has become central to the focus of our lives and the really destructive ways let me be clear, we in the global North have done to the rest of the planet. And the United States was the largest contributor to that. So one of my goals is how do we give something back to help respond to we didn't think of them, nobody thought of them as crimes at the time, but they are really crimes against the planet and crimes against most of the people who live on the planet. And how do we respond to that? And in a very real way, one of the ways we respond to that is to recognize that we are all living elements and part of the fabric of the world in which we live. We're all, and that every creature, from the smallest bacteria to the human beings and everything in between, we all interact with the environment around us. We all modify it to survive. We all change it in different ways just by the simple act of being there. I mean, every breath we all take changes slightly the oxygen and carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere, etc., and then go on from there. So it isn't that we interfere and engage with the world around us. It's how we do it. And are we doing it wisely? Are we doing it in ways that benefit ourselves, our children, our grandchildren, their children, and so on? Or are we doing it in ways that are very short-sighted and only benefit ourselves in what are ultimately shallow and dead-end ways? So one of the reasons that natural and green infrastructure works is that it's based on the fact that when you care for something, it gets stronger. And typically when we work in engineering and products and buildings, we build something and it starts to fall apart over time. And we think about it as how long can it survive? And when does it have to be replaced? And when does it fall apart? A concrete road has a lifetime. The minute you pour concrete on something, you know that concrete is eventually going to break up and have to be repaired, replaced, or done. If you're using a forest, and you're essentially gardening and stewarding that forest, it gets stronger over time. Like a garden gets richer over time. And so it actually appreciates and takes advantage and increases in value. So if you think about the fact, and the reason it does that is because it's based on a cycle, on a system. It's not taking a raw material, doing something with it and throwing it away. It's taking a raw material or a process, being part of a process and helping it sort of expand and go on. So I look at plants, I look at cities, I look at the world we live in, is how do we bring back the living elements that make those cities work? And how do we make those cities survive so that they're not only places for the people to live in them to have meaningful, helpful, resilient lives and families and be able to have the kind of existence that we want, not the kind of existence that people try to impose upon us. And that's not just who we are, that's also all of the living beings around us, the plants, the animals. So how do we have both a rich social life and understand that our rich social life has to also be part of a rich community of which we're only one part. There are 12 million species on the planet. We're one of them. Let's be smart about it. And if that works, then we all benefit. So that's a general sense of my philosophy.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Joss. That was really, really profound. And yeah, it's a whole lot. Okay. Um, was there any moment in your childhood that actually sparked your interest for nature or city and storytelling?
Um, I think that storytelling is so much part of all of our lives. We when we forget about it, we're also telling ourselves a story that they don't matter, and we deprive ourselves of the richness of it. But it's also how we understand things. I mean, even technical things. We understand, you know, how we look at things, how we shape things, how we frame things, how we measure things. All of those things are in the context of the metaphors and stories of our lives. And if if a building that we're in has is just some pieces of material that have been put together and left apart, we're in that building that doesn't talk to us very much. But if that building has a history, if that building has a character, if that building has a life, if that building served many people before us and will serve many people after us, if that building witnessed all kinds of things, if that building shows that the individuals who made that building cared for it and had craftsmanship in it of various kinds, that building is telling a story, and we're telling a story by living in that building. We're telling a story by making that building. And so that building says, if I'm built with care, the builders cared about it. If I'm not built with care, then they didn't care about it. If they didn't care about the building, what else didn't they care about? Maybe they didn't care about, whether it's going to last well in a storm. Maybe they didn't care about whether the pipes are clean that bring the water into it. Maybe they didn't care about a lot of things. But if they cared about that building, then they cared about a lot of things. So even that's a story. And those are the stories we tell. Am I doing something because I want to do it? Am I doing something because I have to do it? Am I doing something because it's meaningful to me?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's the fact that everything actually tells stories, from the material things to the building and everything. They tell stories, and the fact that their usability speak volume to the fact that yeah, the stories of their existence is being told every now and then, being that people value them and people actually care about them, which simply means they're actually more like telling stories. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you have been a very creative. You had a very creative path from art, film to ecology and strategy. How did those different experiences shape your decision to work on climate solution?
Um, I think they all help give me tools, I think, to work. I really, at its core, you know, we do as a community what we value in that community. We We pay attention to things that we as a community decide are important. We act in ways that we as a community, not just as individuals, but as a community, feel are important. And so in the end, once you recognize that we're very far out of balance, that we've spent hundreds of years doing things that have really stressed most of the planetary systems, whether it's the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere or the amount of clean water there is, or the amount of ways we scraped over farmlands and living lands to turn them into concrete, whether we abused, we've destroyed the insect population. There are many things we've done that have stressed the planet. But we wouldn't be doing those things if we recognized that they're things we don't want to be doing. We wouldn't be doing any of those things if we actually thought about the impact of our lives. So it really goes back to storytelling. How do we change the way we look at the world around us so that our engagement is one where we're mutually respectful, where we give back as much as we receive? And again, this is a relearning. There are many, many parts of the world where people have grown up and they've lived in environments and they've understood that they're part of the system they're in. So that if they're hunting, they're asking for permission to take a life because they know that the life of the animal they're hunting is giving them life, but that life is also a taking of a life from some. So it's a recognition that there's an exchange. Whether it's at that level, whether it's people who farm in forests. And here's an interesting. So when the Europeans came to the east coast of the United States, where I'm living in New York, which is a very wet and rainy, it's not a rainforest, but it's almost a it's a very humid place. So there's a lot of living. They came with an idea of what a garden was. A garden was a very structured place. For them. They didn't recognize that they were walking into forests that were living gardens. They couldn't see them. They were blind to what they saw. They were blind that the people lived there, understood the world they lived in, and didn't have to create too many artificial spaces that were structured to be able to provide food for themselves. They didn't need to do some of these things. So they didn't. They did things that maintained the entire health. They did something that we call in the center that I work in. They acted so that the harvest preserved the system, so that what they did for food actually made the forest healthier. They harvested from abundance. What they did when they worked on the fields ended up with fields that endured. And there are different ways to do that in different places, and the easiest way to look at that is in farming. But it's true about everything we do. Is what we're doing making everything better off, or is what we're doing taking away and not giving back so it's not better off? Because if you're taking away, eventually you run out.
Yeah, that's okay.
It just goes away. So there's no, we live in a finite world. There's not some infinite universe out there. There's an infinite universe out there, perhaps, but we don't have access to it. We have access to the world we're in. And so, of course, we have to be working in cycles. Of course, we have to be giving back, because if we keep taking things, and if a city, for example, keeps using coal and water and it takes fresh water in and turns out water that's not potable, that's not giving back. If it takes coal to heat its world and doesn't do anything to mitigate or offset the amount of carbon dioxide it's putting in to the world by burning 200 million year old fossils, that's not giving back. So how do you create a city and the structures and the elements and the pieces that are in that city that understand that they have to breathe in and breathe out, that they have a metabolism like a human being, that waste, the idea that what we in the West call waste doesn't exist in nature. Every output's an input. Everything has a use. Everything has a value. So how do we mimic that? How do we understand that? How do we reproduce that in our daily lives? How do we take back the things that we do? How do we build things that are repairable, not things that you have to dispose of. Or, and if you dispose of something, how is it something that just stays like it is for thousands of years and unchanged? How do we dispose of something so that it returns the basic building blocks of life so it can be reused for something else in a way that's in a time frame that's helpful and meaningful?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. I think is you make reference of our inputs and outputs, and the fact that when I actually more like ask that how did those experiences actually shape your decision on work on climate, you make reference of the fact that it's those demand for it, being that we are living in a world where there is no much care over those particular things, and the whole into the demand, those actually more like there was need for it, you being that you actually saw the need. And yeah, it's yeah. I think you just explain it with another level of energy. I just start thinking about a whole lot of stuff, and growing up in the farmland, having to see more like plants and everything. And yeah, it's amazing. I don't know how to actually, well, like, how will I say it now, put those stories in words, but you just as explaining them was really profound, because it's what I see every now and then. I get to water everything that we eat, everything that we grows, and nourish everything to more like on and on and on and on. Yeah, thank you, Josh. Yeah, you have worked with forest, ocean, wildfire, and now rooftop. What was the turning point that led you to focus on city and green infrastructure?
Well, I think the the immediate thing that made me focus on cities was um, about 7 or 8 years ago. A friend of mine, uh, who's one of the really a wonderful mad genius type, who, and event, um, was taught and I were talking, and he's a person who actually put the first green roof that was an intentional green roof in the city of Manhattan, and appropriately it was on a church, so the Church of St. John the Divine, which is the largest Gothic structure in the United States, and for a while was the largest in the world. Although I think there's a church in Africa now that's larger than it, and it's in the Gothic style. But it's a church that has a social values its presence in the community. And in the early environmental age, they thought they should start experimenting with what we're eventually now talking about, with what happens if you start to bring plants back into the urban structure intentionally. Um, and there was there was a competition that was being set up at that time for the Hunts Point Market, which is the food market for New York City. And it used to be an open air market like markets all around the world, but about over the last 30 years, it's been turned into these giant boxed warehouses that have climate control, and you go inside and they're all assembly lines, and the food comes into New York by truck, which is the least efficient way to bring anything in anywhere of the New York City. For all of it, is an ironic city in some ways, because it has the most developed mass transit in the United States. So people move efficiently, but it has the least developed commercial transit. So instead of bringing food around by railroads, they bring food around by trucks. And so those trucks cause a lot of pollution. They cause a lot of waste heat. There's a lot of these. An issue that's become rather critical in cities called the heat island effect, where cities are hotter than the landscape, and heat is very, particularly as the planet generally gets warmer, heat has become the leading cause of one of the leading causes of death in the United States and around the world. Every time there's a heat wave, you see it. Thousands and thousands of people die unexpectedly because of the heat directly, but indirect causes of heat. And the second big cause of heat in a city like New York is from lung conditions, from asthmatic conditions. It's one of the big causes of death in poorer communities in the United States, because they have less Um, they have less access to open air and less access to space. And so Hunts Point has all of these issues. And so we came up, so I said, how can we sort of think about all these things? And in discussing everything with Paul, we said, well, look, if we put plants on top of these big buildings, we're going to be able to do a bunch of things. First off, the biggest way that the planet cools itself is through the transpiration of water into steam. Right? It's the heat of it's the energy of evaporative cooling. It's the same principle that air conditioners use in the contained space, but the planet uses it. It's actually more important than carbon. It has much more of an impact on the global temperature for all kinds of reasons. How much light gets reflected off by water vapor is one thing. So that heat doesn't even arrive, how much it holds, how much more of it there is than carbon dioxide and some of the other gases, and how much of it on land is dominated by one of the oldest technologies we know. It's about, I don't know, 200 to 400 million years old in spots. It's photosynthesis, the tool by which plants turn carbon dioxide into oxygen and water. And it's that water vapor emerging from the photosynthetic reaction that provides the coolant. So we can address the heat island effect rather profoundly if we bring enough plants in an area. If you bring enough plants on the roofs and walls of a city, you can actually turn that city into a place that has the same ambient temperature as the countryside around it. And if you do it smartly, you don't have to remove the buildings. You just put the plants on the buildings. If you could imagine a mountain that starts from a volcano, it's bare rock, and over 1 million years it becomes a lush forested mountain. We as humans can do that more rapidly. If we can create that transformation from bare space, from bare steel concrete to green space, we get huge benefits from temperature. We get benefits because all of those plants, one of the things that a leaf does is small particles adhere to it. So those same particles that cause asthma and health conditions in people get removed by plants. And then when it rains, those particles get drained off the plant and go into the soil where they become inert. So you can deal with air pollution, you can deal with heat. One of the other problems in a city where you have a lot of concrete is you don't have anywhere for rainwater to go. And so it ends up clogging your systems. And sometimes if you are in the United States, we have water pollution systems that are matched to the number of toilets we have. So in a place like New York, and then a little bit of margin, in a place like New York, whenever it rains more than, say, 3 centimeters an hour, which is heavy rain, but not that heavy rain, it overflows our system, and raw sewage flows into the waters around us. Now, we don't take our drinking water from that river, but if we took our drinking water, instead of the cycle helping us, the cycle would be hurting us. We would be poisoning the water we drink. Well, many cities don't have the luxury that New York does. We get our water from mountains 100 miles away. Many cities have to drink the water from the same place they put their wastewater in. So why are we doing that? Can't we work around that? What can we do to replace that? So all of these problems are the problems of life. And at the same time, more and more people are living in cities. The UN estimates that 80% of the population of the planet will be living in cities. I think Lagos was once a small community. I don't think anyone would say it's a small community now. Whatever, there are 25, 30 million people living in the general area, maybe more. That's unless we change radically how we live our lives, that's the expected future of how the population is going to be. So it's really important that these places are healthy. So that's what came out of that conversation. So first there was a competition. Then we proposed putting, one of the solutions was putting green roofs on these buildings. We had the good fortune of winning the competition. Then COVID, the global epidemic came, and the city fell apart. And everybody's plans disappeared. And so but we continued with the idea that this is an important process to have, and this is an important way to function, and that if we understand that cities can be looked at as living entities with their own metabolisms, and if we can have a healthy metabolism where what goes in and goes out are in balance, and if we can do things that work that way, well, then we can bring a better quality of life in all kinds of ways. And there are many, many small details. You mentioned growing up on a farm. In a city like New York, a lot of people have no idea where their food comes from.
Yeah.
It comes in plastic. It comes in a store in plastic. But if you can bring farming back so that even in small areas, then suddenly people realize not only does food not have to come in plastic, it tastes a whole lot better when it doesn't. And you can do it yourself. During the war, during World War II in the 1940s, 25% of the vegetables that people in the United States grew, they grew at home, in their front yard, in their backyard, on their roofs, on their fire escapes, whatever. We can do that again. Everyone can do that. There isn't a place on the planet where people can't grow a chunk, maybe a big chunk of their own food. And then you have the power of understanding that you are doing that. That's so empowering to people. You're growing this. You can do this. You're connected. And all those connections are part of changing that story. Suddenly, the idea that everything comes in plastic. Why is there so much plastic? You don't need plastic to grow a tomato. You don't need plastic to grow a corn. You don't need plastic to do
Yeah,
these things. You need water. You
thank
need
you so
something
much,
for fertilizer, but you
Josh.
don't need chemical
That was really
fertilizer.
amazing. The fact that you gave a whole lot of illustration, a lot of illustration in respect of why you made that particular strategic decision. Because I think in town there's a whole lot of well, I say items that can't be reusable owing to their plastic, their cellophane, and a
Right,
whole lot of other stuff, which actually more like disrupt life and
right,
cause more like pollution, especially when you make reference of truck too. And yeah, I know I know the bigger issue it costs every now and then having a lot of them around, and the fact that there is no plants that get to kind of at least supply us some level of oxygen owing to the
right,
fact that they were able
right,
to kind of take in those carbon dioxide that was being more like generated from. Yeah, it's because I just remember more like being in the village then where we have those particular little plant around. It surprised me that those plants do so well in major city if one can actually cultivate them owing to there's a whole lot of carbon dioxide they could actually use for the making of their own food compared to deep forests where
right,
there's no one living in there compared to.
right,
Yeah, so if one could actually more like work on it, have more like little gardens, they do so well. We even well in city compared to forests where we just have them as plant there
right,
without no humans living in there.
right. No, you can create. It's a continuum. You can create small little forested areas in very small places. And if you do enough of them, you get lots of benefit from them. You don't have to put a forest everywhere. You don't have to put a garden everywhere. You can have it one of the things that in some parts of well, let me just say two things here. First, about plastics. Singapore recently did something. They banned plastic for food packages, and they required people to wrap food in banana leaves.
Wow.
And guess what? It works fine. Why? Because they used to do it that way before they had plastics. They said, why don't we go back to that? We have plenty of banana leaves, and other leaves that we can use. Why are we using plastic containers for food when we can create containers out of leaves? And I wouldn't be surprised if that principle worked in different ways anywhere there's tropical rain and broadleaf plants that can actually be used. That's just one example of we don't need plastics. We use plastics for what we think of as convenience. And there are certain mechanical and industrial uses where plastic is really helpful. So
Yeah.
there's a limited space for plastic that makes a lot of sense, but it certainly doesn't need to be the most universal wrap we have for everything. And it doesn't need to be a solution for all kinds of other things. When there are plenty of containers that people had that were airtight and watertight. There are plenty of ways to capture food. There are plenty of ways to carry. I mean, one of the obscenities of this world is that we, particularly in the North, is that we use plastic for drinking water bottles. Why are we doing that? That hurts everything. In addition to spreading microplastics in the water in ways we don't need, why not? Why not use a reusable water container, of which there are a million ways to do inexpensive water containers. There's not one, and you could use bamboo. Why not? You can
Yeah.
use glass. People use leather. There's a very, 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 very wide range of containers and ways to make containers. Why do we default to plastic? We don't have to. That's a choice we make. Why are we choosing to make it? Well, because we've told ourselves there's no harm in it and there's a lot of convenience. Why are we saying there's no harm? Because we've allowed ourselves to ignore the evidence of garbage around us, the evidence of we know how bad it is in some ways. And there's convenience. We've allowed ourselves to say this illusion of convenience and of disposable things is more important than the permanence of having something that endures. Well, what if we change that? What if we say, I'd rather have 2 shirts that last 25 years or even a lifetime than 10 shirts that last a year or less. Okay, so those 2 shirts might be more expensive, but they're not more expensive than 10 shirts.
Yeah. So true. Yeah. Thank you very much, Josh. Many of my listeners are trade people, builders, or painters, installer, people who work with their hands. What role do you see them play in this new green economy?
Oh, I see a huge role. I mean, I think this is what is so exciting and also so frustrating that we aren't seeing it. We aren't taking more advantage of it. All the really important thing about green infrastructure is it's place-based. It doesn't live on a server, some server farm somewhere. It's not digital. And it's physically located in a particular place, and it has to be physically made and installed. Well, people have to do that. That requires all. So the earliest 20th century solar technology was solar water heating. Well, solar water heating is plumbing. So building a lot of solar water heaters means you're employing a lot of essentially plumbers, whether they call themselves plumbers or not. So one of the challenges for green infrastructure right now, like green roofs, is that they're very expensive and they're used on fancy buildings as showcases. Our goal, or at least is to make them cheap enough so that they can be, and modular enough so that they can be available broadly. And you don't need much more than an ordinary skilled technician to do that. What does that mean? That means if every house has a green roof or a solar roof, every house needs an installer for that green roof and solar roof. There's a huge opportunity, for all of if we take advantage of it. Everything that we're, because most of these technologies are mechanical in some way. They're actually about processes. You have to physically move soil. You have to physically plant something. You have to use certain materials in certain ways. You have to go back to something and take care of it. Well, all of those are people skills. All of those are human skills. And they're also enduring because they're stewardship skills. You're maintaining something, you're caring for something, which means the job it's not just you do it once and you go away. You have some of that, but you also have all of these jobs that require people to come back and pay attention over time. So there's not only initial work to do this, there's ongoing maintenance work. And it's absolutely a field of great promise for everybody in all the mechanical trades, because they're all needed in one way or another. People need to install wind energy. People need to install solar panels. People need to install different kinds of water. People need to work differently in fishing. Everything we do has an opportunity for skilled tradespeople to maintain their skills, learn new ones, but they're new ones in the same version of, they're not learning something that's 180 degrees different and they might never feel they can manage it. It's just taking advantage of things they already know how to do and applying them in a slightly different context. And that context is a whole different kind, it's a whole different kind of energy, which is why I'm always baffled by the success of the myth that environmental ecologies and green technologies take away your jobs. No, corporate capitalist greed takes away your job as they replace you with a machine and you with that. Green energy, it gives you jobs. It provides jobs. It creates work, and it creates meaningful work because it creates work that's tied to your place so that you can live in a place where you know, wow, you've done all that roofing over there. Those people now all have heat. Those people now all have a lot cooler weather. I can breathe easier because of the pollution that's reduced. I like looking at plants a lot more than I looking at corrugated steel. All of those things are benefits that stay in the place you're in. They don't get extracted to somebody off in London or New York or Los Angeles or Tokyo or Beijing to sit around and put into a bank account somewhere. So it's exactly the opposite. It's the only way we're going to have real work, meaningful work over time is if we pay attention to these things.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh. I think it's the fact that you make reference of there's a whole lot of gap for the skilled personnel when it comes to the grain, because everything that revolve around the grain, it needs some level of skilled personnel to actually get to do. Simply means for those who are trade persons, there's a whole lot huge opportunity for them in that particular aspect to type in. Compared to AI is coming in, taking up job, a whole lot of infrastructure is coming in, taking up our jobs. Whereas green actually more like provide a whole lot of templates for you to actually more like not necessarily learn a new skill, but just to more like upgrade what you actually had to actually more like do something related to it. Yeah, thank you so much, Josh. Some people think that green roof or green wall are luxury upgrade. Can you explain the real measurable value they create in health, savings, and resilience?
Yeah, I think that the challenge is, of course, anything that's new and not part of a system is going to be more expensive when it starts. And that's just a reality because they haven't learned all the tools of mass production and scale. There's no difference in green technology. I would point out that solar panels, when I first started looking at solar energy when I was a kid a long time ago, but let's call it 1978, when I founded an organization called Students for Solar Energy to understand why there was no solar energy at my university, which was in San Diego, California, which is a very sunny place. And there are a lot of very smart physicists and scientists at all kinds in this university, and none of them thought solar energy was very important. Solar electricity was more than $100 a watt. Now it's less than pennies a watt. A solar panel that cost $100 now costs 10 cents. That's what's going to happen with all green infrastructure if we pay attention to it and we allow it to scale. Now, the other thing that happens, didn't happen in the United States, China did this, is no industry happens without the public supporting it in any major way. That's why computers came, because the US government spent a whole lot of money for the army, mostly for military purposes, but we had the internet. All of those things, the oil industry didn't start out as a very powerful industry. It started out as a very tiny industry. It got a lot of protection, and a lot of support. It's a national industry in Nigeria, as it is in many places. And if you suggested to the government that it should maybe that the costs of oil are maybe being subsidized by the citizens of Nigeria in ways that are maybe not very good for the lifespans of the people in Nigeria, they might not think you're right. They might think it's much more important because they might look at the actual dollars that come in and think of those in a vacuum. They might not think of the costs that those dollars have attended to them. And there are plenty of them. Those are what we call in economics the externalities don't matter. And so that's true of green technology in the other way. We have to get the same support, or it's going to take, or it'll happen, but just take much longer than we have. We don't have the luxury of a 50-year runway to do this slowly. That said, the big issue here is about scaling. How do you get it cheap enough? And one of the ideas we have is to make things modular, so that a green roof isn't something that you're doing where you need to lay out the entire roof at a time, so that a green roof can come in small hexagonal packages that don't weigh very much. Then you can, if you only have a small yard or a small roof, you can put just one or two of them up, if you have, or as many as you need to fill whatever you need. And that as long as you connect them hydraulically, so that the water systems flow in the right way, and as long as you plant them and maintain them, you get all the benefits of a green roof in a way that can be installed by, as I said, your plumber or your roofing, or somebody who knows how to build roofs, or even a carpenter, or even somebody who's handy, who does all those things informally. If you're handy enough, you can get to the level. If you're handy enough, you can build your own home. You don't need to hire skilled craftsmen. If you're not handy enough, you hire the people you need. But so to get it to that level, what we call here internally the IKEA flat pack approach to green infrastructure, so that you can go to a big store and buy and come back with a cart, and in that cart you can have a stack of 10 or 12 green roofing panels, and then you can put those green roofing panels where you need them, and they don't weigh that much, so that your roof is strong. You have to check that your roof is strong enough to hold it, but if your roof is strong enough to hold it, or if you can support your roof, build the structures that your roof needs, then suddenly you get them on your roof, and you don't necessarily need to put them on everything on your roof. You can build gardens in your yards. You can build things on the walls. You can build runners of different kinds, to build different kinds of trellises to bring your roofs, to bring the value of the plants onto the walls of the building. There are many, many, and if you do that, you've got 4 times the real estate that you had if you just used your roof. Now, you can't use all that real estate for plants, but you can use some of it. Say you've doubled your real estate. Now you've doubled the ecological value and impact of what you've done, simply by planting not just on your roof, but planting on, maybe the south wall.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh. Thank you so much. I'm really learning a whole lot in the course of this in the course of this interview, and then I'm still going to return back to it and listen more to it. But how does design thinking make green infrastructure scalable and practicable for ordinary city?
Well, design thinking is a kind of visualization technique of looking backwards from what the end result that you want, and figuring out how to get there. If you think of it that way, every city at any level can do it. It's a matter of planning. The earliest cities that we know of in the Mediterranean, in Iraq, in Mesopotamia, they had solar cooling systems that were brilliantly engineered. They didn't have electricity. They didn't have any of the things we think of as high technology. They had very smart technology. They understood how heat rose. They understood the sun. They understood how to place their buildings intelligently. They understood how to use heat and air movement and shade to protect themselves from excessive heat. And they have 4,000-year-old buildings that are still in use today, that are designed in such a way that they mitigate the incredible heat of the Mesopotamian desert. Similarly, they have water systems that are still functioning today that are 4,000 years old. The city of Mumbai is the best example I know of a city that uses marshland, wetlands, to clean up as a waste for its urban waste, and that's been actively functioning since at least 1600, so for 400 years now, in a formal way. That's not expensive. That requires real estate, but it doesn't require billions of dollars, and uses a lot of people. Again, skilled tradesmen, skilled craftsmen. Does not need to be run by machines and or computers. I mean, they exist. They're part of it. So any city at any level of economic ability, if it chooses to, has the resources to move in this direction. The consumer side, the individual side, the what you might call the retail side, is where we need to help provide more tools. But you can start by gardening. You can start by you don't need money to do that. You can start by learning how to fish more wisely. And if you're on a coastline, you can start by working and understanding that marshlands purify water. Mollusks, oysters, mussels, they purify not just a little water, a lot of water. If you have an oyster bed or certain kinds of mussels, and you have a square meter of that, a square meter of mussels in a tide in an area with moving water, they can filter 8,000 liters of water a day. I mean, that's enormous.
Yeah.
Roughly, okay, I'm doing some math here. Roughly 5 hectares of mussel beds over the 700 kilometers of coastline of New York City would purify all of the wastewater of New York City.
Oh.
Spread out appropriately. That's why New York City has created recently something called the Billion Oyster Project to try to get the oysters back, in which they were. We poisoned them. The New York estuary was one of the great repositories of oysters in the world. We poisoned them all, and we ate a lot of them, and then we poisoned the rest. Now we're trying to bring them back. And oysters and clams and mussels, if you eat further down on the food chain, you eat fewer of the predator fish at the top, the apex species that, and much more of the filter feeders down below. You can harvest them in great quantities without hurting their ability to reproduce themselves. They're much cheaper. You don't need to give them nutrients. They can take their nutrients out of the water that comes in out of the byproducts of the other living creatures. So suddenly it's a food system. If we eat lower down on the food chain, and many places already do this, if we eat insects, for example, locusts are a wonderful source of protein, and they're not expensive ecologically. They're very cheap ecologically and accessible. So people are already doing things. They have to do more of the things that they used to do, and change some of the things they're doing now. And those are all inexpensive ways to go a long way. Or, there's I think one of the things that's happened in Africa that's another smart example of this is cell phones. Cell phones exploded in Africa because they didn't have the infrastructure to build land telephone lines everywhere. It was too expensive. Guess what? They don't need that infrastructure anymore. They saved themselves a whole lot of money by jumping technologies. You can do that too. Look for where the smart technologies are so you're not replicating the mistakes of other places and jumping forward to the new things. I mean, don't build coal-powered plants now. That's terrible. Build solar plants. It's much cheaper. It's cheaper. And you have land to do it. So why would you go back to build something old? There's more solar energy falling on the planet than anyone could possibly imagine using, even if we, and you don't have to take huge amounts of the planet to do it. And every time you do something like that, you're not burning carbon in some other way. So you're reducing the stress on the planet in other ways.
Yeah.
So all of these things are accessible to every city, to every place, at every level that they exist. If people think strategically and think globally and
Yeah.
think environmentally, that's what you need to do. You need to be thinking differently. Your
Yeah.
actions are
Designing
going to be
thinking.
available.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh. Yeah, I think you just give more like a pictorial view of what the designing thinking could be. Yeah, I think from what you just said, I see the scalability part and the fact that it's practical for ordinary cities, being that with the whole of this particular stuff being put together, we don't have to actually be the fact that the you make reference of how those various things could actually clean our water. The fact that we don't need to kind of go back to coal, the solar is already in existence. They could
Right.
actually more like solve a whole lot of the issues we are actually combating with if those systems could actually be put in place. Yeah, thank you so much. But finally, if you could paint the picture of the future, let's say 20 years from now, what will our city look like if they actually embrace nature and infrastructure?
Well, I think we can see some of what they might look like in some cities that have moved that way already. Like Singapore has moved quite a bit. China, um, China's very interesting. They are probably the best and the worst simultaneously. So they are both the largest emitter now. They've taken over from the United States, um, for better or for worse. Um, and they are the largest producer of coal plants, but they're also the largest producer of solar in the planet.
Yeah,
They also are producing green cities at the rate they're building whole cities from scratch that are based on some of these concepts that we're talking about. They're the cities themselves. The buildings are designed to be planted buildings. They're designed to be low carbon buildings, zero net carbon buildings. They're designed to bring some of these things. So they're building good cities and bad cities, but they're building a lot of cities so you can see them. So you could imagine if you could imagine some of the newer cities of China or some of the parts of Singapore as what that would look like. You can look at buildings, Milan in Italy has done a fair bit. They have a number of living buildings there that are structurally quite large and that are show you what that kind of green infrastructure can look like. As I mentioned, taking what Mumbai has done and what they're doing with their water system, that could be implemented all over the place. And you need the physical geography for it, but every city that's located on the water side has former or existing wetlands that could be adapted for that. And if you design a human waste management system well, the water that comes out of that is cleaner than the water in your tap. So it's not. So this is not a sacrifice. This is actually turning something into what eventually is a park. Um, and so I would think that the other thing I would just say is that you don't have to do this on your own. This is a beautiful experience for local communities, for towns, for blocks, for families, for it's not like you yourself have to have a garden. Why not talk to your neighbors and find a small plot of land that's not being used by anything else, or that maybe it needs to be cleaned up, but maybe you work together with 10 or 15 people or 20 people and you all collectively, and now you have a place you can all farm. And not only that, you're working together and you're adding to your own sense of community. So not only are you building yourself something that's of value, you're building this relationship that what you're doing is mutual benefit and mutual aid, and that benefits everybody. And that the same thing that can be applied to, if changing the orientation of a house or changing something is too much for one person, you're building on a sense of what people do already, is they ask their friends and neighbors to help. So this is another way that you can bring your friends and neighbors and collective action in towards changing pieces of a city. And if enough small groups of people do that, that's even better than having the top tell the bottom to do it. because that's really owned by the people who are doing it and living it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh. This the fact that you make reference of China being that they are emitting much, but the fact that they're already putting out sustainable means to doing this already give more like a pictorial view of what 20 years time could actually look like if in our little corners we actually get to adapt to we get to embrace nature as infrastructure. Yeah, thank you so much. So more like Josh, tell us more about yourself and how people can learn more from you before we actually more like be done with this conversation.
Well, I'm happy to hear from people. You can reach me most easily through, I guess, the Center for the Study of the Force Majeure. That's my educational institute that looks at art and science. And I think you can put it in the show notes because it's too complicated to say over the over the
Yeah, no
air.
problem.
Uh,
It's definitely going to be. I'll put in the show notes.
okay. And also, you can also reach me at leafisland.org if you have questions, and be happy to respond. And um, I think really the most important thing, as we said earlier, is to give people the tools that they can to take to recover their own lives and what we all need. We're we have a lot of pressure around all of us to say there's nothing we can do about it. The world is falling apart. It's other people are more powerful than us and all. And those things all have truth, but they also aren't the whole truth. And there's a lot we can do, and there's a lot we should be doing. And to say that we can't do it is also to let that happen without us. It doesn't have to happen without us. We can be part of the process of making our lives better. And I think we owe it to our children, and we owe it to their children, and we owe it to our grandchildren, regardless of what the outcome are. I'll leave you with this. One of my favorite quotations that I use is, "A society grows great when old people plant trees in whose shade they know they shall never sit."
Wow, wow, wow. This is amazing. Wow. Please, can you reiterate that again? I didn't hear you
Okay.
very well, but I actually
Okay.
more like hear the part that you make reference of. If more like the old persons get to plant trees,
Okay.
it will
So
actually give
it's
shade
it's
to the
it's a
younger.
yeah, it's an old Greek proverb that I love. It's called, "A society, a society is a great society when old people plant trees in whose shade they know they shall never sit."
Hmm. If old people actually plant trees. Wow, this is profound. Thank you for leaving us with that. It's really amazing. And it has really been amazing, more like having this course of discussion with you. I think I just learned from today that I didn't know much about about the whole of what we discussed about, but it has really been an amazing moment, owing to the fact that you went of knowledge in it, and the fact that you have done some couples of projects and done a whole lot of stuff on it. Really make it profound. It's yeah, I'm definitely going to learn more about this, and yeah, I'll find a way to actually more like put these in structures. And because actually really buy this idea of having more like a home, have more like a little gardens all along. And I think growing up we have it, and it was really amazing getting to see how those things grow, getting to see that the fact that yeah, the little things that we get to plant today was able to sustain us after that particular time till the end of the year before we get to replant again. It was really an amazing moment getting to see that the giving and the fact that the reproducing again was actually much, and not being exposed to a lot of chemicals when it comes to food production and everything, which was really amazing.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
This
thank
has
you. So
been
I'll
really
just
fun.
read out the outro before we
Mm.
actually more like end. So Joshua, thank you for joining us today for showing us that the future of a city isn't just concrete and steel, but living system that work with nature. For everyone listening, check out Live Island and liveisland.org to learn how rooftop wall and even waste can become part of their climate solution. The link is going to be on the show notes. This is the Aro Benaiah Show, reminding you that working with your hands, your ideas, and your resilience can build not just business, but a better future. Until next time, keep creating, keep building, and keep believing in what is possible. Yeah, this is the Aro Benaiah Show. Thank you.
Thank you.